So in this video, I am going to tell you exactly what you need to prioritize, starting from most useful and arguably least expensive, going up to some of the more less useful and more expensive items inside of my kitchen. We're going to cover the top 10 most important categories of items and individual items. So yeah, if you're on a budget and you've realized that, hey, kitchen equipment is not cheap and this is going to be an expensive hobby, fear not, because you can make some really smart decisions, and by having the right pieces and the right technique, you can do a ton more than you think you can for your budget. And we want to cover all of that inside of this video. Okay, that's enough talking. It is now time for me to clean up all of this stuff and jump into our list. The most basic, fundamental thing that you need in your kitchen to do any sort of cooking, well, any sort of prepping, and by proxy, any sort of cooking, I would argue is going to be a knife. Now, if you're feeling fancy, you can start with 3. Most integral, good-sized chef knife. This is going to be your workhorse. This is going to do most of your prepping. If you're feeling frivolous, you can also get yourself a bread knife. Obviously, very good for bread, very good for cutting larger things, large fruit, things like that. Very, very versatile, very, very useful. And lastly, I would say if you're splashing out, get yourself a paring knife. This is good for a lot more detail work, small things. But having said that, if you are on a super tight budget, I would recommend getting yourself a cheap chef's knife and making sure it's sharpened well. I'll leave a link in the bio to one that I would highly recommend. It's a Victorinox Fortuner, I believe is the brand. Super cheap, super versatile, super sharp, and one knife will do pretty much everything that you need it to. And by proxy, if the first thing that you're going to need is a knife, I would argue that the second thing that you're going to need is a good quality chopping board. I would highly, highly recommend wood or plastic over any other material. I like wood because it looks quite nice, it feels really good to cut on, but plastic is also great too. I would not recommend something ceramic or glass. That's a really great way to ruin the edge of your knife. It's just not good, doesn't feel nice, sounds ill. So wouldn't recommend it. The thickness of the board isn't a big deal, and if you're starting out on a budget, I'd go with something inexpensive and as big as possible for the price. I believe I got this guy made of bamboo. It was something like 15 euros, 20 euros. It's really nice and big. I use it for a lot of my shooting just because of the real estate, even though this is kind of like a nicer, more expensive board. But yeah, don't chop on plates or countertops or whatever. Get yourself a decent, cheap cutting board, and you're good for prepping. This is a comfortable position. For our next category of most useful and versatile items in the kitchen, we are going to talk about pots. And now obviously these come in a number of shapes and sizes, and you do not need all of these, but I will talk about just how useful they are. So there's like a nice medium-sized pot. I think there's about like 3 liters, 3 quarts, something like that. Very, very useful, good for cooking pasta, stews, risottos, whatever. Very versatile, very good. I think that should be the first pot that you get. Second most useful is kind of like a toss-up. If you do larger batches of things, well, I want to say this is like 6 liters to 8 liters is probably what you're looking for. Big batches of things, if you like batch cooking, if you like meal prep. Super versatile. This little guy, now this, I think it holds the same volume as that medium-sized one, but you have a wider bottom. This is good for braising. Hey buddy. You can sear a bunch of things inside of here. Very, very versatile. Probably the one I use the most, arguably. But if you're not used to it, it might not be your cup of tea. Come, Mil. And last but not least, there's this little guy. I think it's like a 1.5 liter pot. I probably use this the least, but I still do use it. And I know what you're probably thinking, Steve, your pots look kind of expensive, and this was meant to be ranked in order of most to least affordable. Yes, you're right. But I would argue that pots are one of those things that you're going to get a bunch of hand-me-downs. My parents tried to give me pots. I found pots, excuse me, inside of this apartment. So I think you're probably set. You don't need to spend this much on a set of pots and pans, although these were surprisingly budget for like tri-ply stainless. I'll do a full video on probably reviewing this pots and pan set and why you should get it. But for now, I'll just leave some links in my bio to see if you're interested. To the next one. Oh, one more thing. The lids are useful, so if they actually come with your pot and pan set, amazing. If you get hand-me-downs and you don't have lids, it's not the end of the world. Bye. Yeah, back here again, no moving. Our next category is pans. And while in the previous category, I was very happy to have basically a full set of just stainless steel pieces, as I feel like that's one of the best materials, outside of maybe like a cast iron casserole dish, but we're getting in the weeds. When it comes to pans, I feel like these three that I'm about to mention, you're probably going to want at least 2 of these different types, based on what things you cook the most. Let's get into it. So, this is probably the one that you are most familiar with. This is a non-stick pan. It has like a Teflon coating. This one has quite a sturdy Teflon coating. It's aluminium and heats up super fast. I heat it up on the stove. It is amazing for eggs, crispy skinned fish, anything that I want to be quite thoughtless and is prone to sticking, I will pull out this pan. It's great. Omelets, excellent. Yeah, mostly eggs. Let's call it mostly eggs. So you're great, but you're probably the least powerful of the pans. Next, we have cast iron, and as you can see, this guy needs a clean. That is the downside of this pan. It needs a little bit of maintenance, but your trade-off is, if you take care of it, it can be just as non-stick, well, let's say almost as non-stick as the non-stick pan. It is very thick, it is very heavy, which means it holds on to heat incredibly well. Microphone, ASMR. What was I saying? Yeah, so because it is so thick and because it can hold on to heat so well, you are not going to get a better sear on any of these other pans as you can in this. If you want to get a steak like super perfect, amazing brown, this is the guy for you. I also do quite a bit of baking in here. Like I've done cornbread, regular bread, like it's a good time. Now, stainless steel. This one is probably most prone to sticking. Having said that, it is almost as good as the cast iron for like holding on to heat. It is one of the easiest to clean. You don't need to be super delicate with it. This is kind of like your jack of all trades, master of none perhaps, although it does do things really, really well. If I want to just like sear chicken breast and get the skin really nice and crispy, and I don't need the insane, hi buddy, the insane 300 plus degrees I need in the other one, I will go stainless. Baby, come here. You wanna be on camera? Come here. To the next one. Okay, this is a fun angle. For our next entry on the list, we're gonna do a bit of a quick fire and go through all of the essential small hand tools that you may need. You do not need all of these by any means. In fact, I would argue that you could get away. Buddy, come here. Sorry, cat's going crazy. I would argue that you could get away with replacing a lot of these with just a simple large spoon, but we'll get to that. So let's start by manipulating your food as it is cooking, whether it's in a pan, in a tray, or whatever. You're going to need either a set of tongs or a set of large tweezers. I find these very, very useful for turning over pieces of meat, moving things around. Super, super useful. Again, not absolutely necessary if you're on a budget, but neither of these are crazy expensive. Next, I think quite, maybe not necessary, but very, very useful for, again, cooking pieces of meat, scooping up large portions of food to like move around. Come here, be in the camera, stop whining. Scooping around large portions of foods to move around, very, very useful. I like the ones with holes in them, so as if I'm pulling something out of a pan that's got a bunch of oil in it, it's gonna drip off. It's very nice. Again, not amazingly necessary, because of the same thing with a spoon, and it kind of works. Next, this is for mixing and scooping. I would recommend either a rubber spatula, highly, highly recommend. Definitely make sure that this is like a heat-proof silicone, otherwise you're going to get kind of screwed. And a wooden spoon or a replacement for a wooden spoon. This is made of some kind of like, again, high heat resistant plastic. I love it. Yeah, I need to clean it better, but I love it. But yeah, would highly recommend both of them. Next category, large ladle for scooping, very, very useful, highly recommended, but you can always just pour out of a pot, but this definitely makes life a little bit easier. And in that same category, a large spoon is super useful, both for, well, pretty much for anything. This kind of like a more expensive cooking spoon. It's very heavy duty, great for basting pieces of meat as you're cooking, scooping things out of a pan, portioning, everything. I love this spoon. Yeah, but you could literally do most of the things over here with a good spoon, or even just if you're super broke, just tablespoons like your normal cutlery drawer. Now these we're kind of getting a little bit more fringe, but pretty useful. Little strainer or sieve. These come in multiple shapes or sizes. Would highly recommend them. They're pretty cheap. You can go to some like discount dollar store kind of situation and get shitty versions of all of these, and they'll kind of do the job just fine. Same with the strainer.
Here we have a honing rod. You basically run your knife across it. It keeps it nice and sharp. It doesn't... We're not going to get into sharpening and not sharpening. Very useful item, would highly recommend getting a decent one. Not going to go into too much detail, but useful. Not the most necessary, but useful. This is a microplane zester. If you don't have this, get a box grater, but some sort of grating implement is going to be very useful. You will definitely need one, whether this is for cheese, for lemon zest, for grating chocolate on stuff. Very versatile, very useful. And last two, arguably some of the most important in your kitchen arsenal. This is a mobile phone. Let's pretend it's a timer. My current timer is broken. But this has a timer inside it. You don't need to buy a timer. You probably have a phone. So this shouldn't be on the list, but timers are useful. Use them more in your cooking. And last, and arguably one of the most important, a little instant read thermometer. Put this inside your meat and it will always be cooked to perfect doneness. That's not a guarantee. This will help you cook meat better to good donenesses. Because if I know that medium rare is 54, hey buddy, if I know that the medium rare is 54, then I can check in my meats at 54. So this is great. To the next category. Baby, come here. Okay, let's see how this works. Next on the list, I give you my prep drawer thing situation. And essentially what this contains is a bunch of small mixing bowls, a bunch of plastic containers, both for mise en place, and this is the same size, both for mise en place and for leftovers. Mixing bowls, small and clear, large and useful for salads and for baking. Baking tray, no, not baking trays. Here we have some just clear plastic trays. These are used for putting a bunch of ingredients on, and very important, things that I use for measuring. I do most of my measurements with a weighing scale, and I have a smaller scale for like smaller gram measurements. Measuring cylinders are very useful. I use them sometimes to measure liquids if it's something that I can do rough, like pasta, but for the most part I just use them for moving around large amounts of liquids and not really much for measuring. Yeah, I love this rug. Welcome to a little bit of behind the scenes. Also, this rug is not my standard kitchen setup. I just use it for like sound dampening, so enjoy it behind the scenes. To the next one. Next on the list, we are going to talk baking trays and that kind of stuff. Now, most of your ovens will come with trays and racks and things, which are very useful. What I would highly recommend getting is a silicone baking sheet, for sure. Not really part of this category, but it's just going to save you a bunch of baking paper. Very versatile, very useful, cleans easy. Kind of loud. Highly recommended. Now, let's go to smaller things in the same category. So yeah, I'd highly recommend using the big boy inside your oven, but that probably already came with your oven. I love having these much smaller trays. Really versatile, stay nice and clean. I find a lot more than the oven trays, and a lot of them come with these racks, which are super useful, either for putting a roast of meat on top of, or from just to let something dry out inside of the oven, use them as a baking rack. Very, very versatile, and they usually come as a set. In the same category, depending on how much you like this kind of stuff, I love having smaller trays. Something like this can hold 2 chicken breasts, 2 chicken thighs very comfortably, a tray very comfortably, a steak very comfortably on the tray. I would highly recommend getting a bunch of these. Stainless steel is the material that you are looking for. Now, I don't have like any proper big, nice, expensive roasting dishes, but like one good metal, not here. One good metal or even like a ceramic baking dish is gonna come in handy, whether you're trying to layer anything, make something like a lasagna, I don't know. Very, very useful, highly recommended. In the same category, I'm also going to put a lot of your actual baking trays. So if you like baking, there's a muffin tin, a cake pan, bread pan. This stuff can all add up. So kind of take my recommendations and just use what you think, and just buy rather what you think you're going to get the most use out of. You don't need all of this by any means. A lot of these are actually quite recent purchases, especially the baking stuff. But yeah, I would say bare minimum. Maybe trays aren't an absolute necessity. I really like the small trays, but that's just me. The baking dish, you're definitely gonna need something. Bare minimum. before we get further into the list and we start talking about bigger, more expensive appliances, I just want to let you know that if you want to take a look at any of my recommendations for any of these items that we've covered so far and the ones that we will be covering, you can check out the description of this video where I will leave a bunch of affiliate links. Don't feel pressured to buy, but if you just want to see recommendations of bits and pieces that I would recommend, that's the place for it. On to the next one. Okay, things are starting to get a little bit more expensive, and we are going to talk about mixing and blending and what you actually need in the kitchen. So, what you're actually seeing here, this is a super powerful, amazing blender. This is a very high-powered food processor. This is an immersion blender, very useful, and this is a tiny little mini chopper. Now, prices range heavily. This, quite expensive, I think was about $400. This, quite expensive, I think was about $400. I don't know, I'm saying dollars, euros. This, less so. This you can probably get for like 100 to 150. And these are kind of like top of the line models of each of these. They're very, very powerful because I wanted them to be based on my needs. Now, what do you guys need from these? What would I recommend getting first? And if we're talking power and price, what do you actually need? Is more better? So I would say take your pick of what you're going to use most of these based on what you make the most of. If you make a smoothie pretty much every day and maybe you like a nice smooth soup from time to time, you're gonna need a blender. I wouldn't recommend making smoothies inside of a food processor. Do you need this big, super powerful one? Not really. If it's just for those simple uses, an immersion blender does the job really, really well. Do you want to crush ice, make peanut butter, make super, super smooth purees, break down heavy ingredients? This is going to do the job. If you want to get a regular blender that's not as powerful, just for your like smoothies and whatever, maybe you want a NutriBullet in your life or something, that's totally fine. Food processor, this is really good for a number of things that this would not be able to do. Like I use this to make pie doughs, you can use this to make pasta dough, use this to make dips, spreads, whatever, a lot of the same things that the blender will do. This will also do, some arguably better, this will not get it as smooth as this. However, food processors do come with a ton of other attachments for things like grating and chopping vegetables. This can be like a bit of a preparation workhorse, but it kind of depends on your use case. Honestly, I bought this big, beautiful, amazing food processor that comes with a bunch of different attachments and things. I can like juice citrus in here, like it's pretty amazing. Having said that, I got this as a sponsored product to make some videos with last year, and I reach for this thing a little bit more often than this guy. This is completely battery powered. It is not nearly as powerful as this, if anything, like way, way less powerful. But if I just want to like crush some stuff, make a really small, simple sauce, like it kind of does the job. So again, more power is not always better. More power will mean, all more power means is that it's going to break down ingredients faster and probably finer. If you don't care about either of those things or processing any like very hard, difficult ingredients, you don't need to go super powerful with these things or super expensive. Next. Okay, now let's continue talking about mixing. Now, I think this is the one where we have the biggest scaling of price range based on what you actually cook and would like to be able to cook. Now, obviously, biggest heavyweight over here, a big stand mixer. Bonus points if it's one of those that has heat inside of it, but I really don't think you need that, and that's gonna be crazy expensive, and we're talking budget, but whatever. This is definitely the most versatile. This you can do the biggest batches with. You can whisk things, you're able to do things like fancy meringues and stuff like that. General purpose K-beating for like cakes and batters and whatever. Dough hook, make bread, make pasta, make it the most effectively as possible, and these things especially have a bunch of attachments, so if you ever want to get a pasta machine, you want to get a mincer. Again, not essentials that are going to like fully enable your cooking, but like a lot of little niche stuff that becomes very, very useful. If you don't like baking, then I'm gonna say this is kind of useless for you. You don't really need it, it's very expensive. You'll probably get much better mileage out of a good set of trays, pots and pans, like some of those other things, better knife, whatever. Those are all going to be more and more useful. So next down the tier list, if you are the occasional baker and there's just like, you wanna be able to make mousses and meringues and maybe just whisk stuff up without blowing any elbow grease. A handheld whisk is pretty great. I would recommend a battery-powered one. You're not going to miss the power difference and it just makes things so much easier. I got this one for free actually and didn't think I would be like wow in love with it, but kind of love it. They don't sponsor me anymore, so that's just complete honest opinion review. Cheapest. Very effective, one of my favorites. I still reach for this a lot, with just like mix things together, make vinaigrettes. I probably can whisk egg whites faster than this if I'm going like full blast. Like this is great. You really don't need much more if you're just like an enthusiast cook who's not super into baking, but a whisk is useful for stuff from time to time. Normal whisk, or even like a baby version of this, does the job. Really good. Also, I know we're way past that section, but to go back to what I said about the knives, you definitely need a peeler to go with those knives. This is super cheap, super versatile, super great. And if you want a good pair of kitchen shears, these are really useful and are basically like a knife that does this. On to the next one. Okay, for this penultimate category, or kind of realistically the last category before we start getting very, very niche, and this is still arguably a little niche, I am going to be talking about sous vide cooking, and there's a bunch of multi-cooker units that also have sous vide functionality, as well as pressure cooking, rice cooking, like very, very versatile. I would genuinely recommend one of these things. Let's just take a look at the inside so I can show you something. So you can basically cook anything in the size of this little pot here, which is great. If you want to sous vide things, you can put a decent chunk of meat or whatever you want to cook inside of here. And as a pressure cooker for meal prep or whatever, batch cooking, it's generally a really good size. So would highly, highly recommend one of these guys. Does a whole lot. A lot of these you can sear, you can simmer inside of, so like very, very versatile. Arguably should be a little bit higher on the list. And this wasn't crazy expensive. I think it's like 200-ish a unit, 250. I'm not sure. I'll link in the description. But if you tend to cook for a large number of people, like let's say Christmas is at your house every year, and you really want to take some like stress off of your head, or even if you're just like meal prepping like enormous pieces of meat, whatever, I would highly recommend a simple sous vide circulator. This thing I think was like 100 euros. They're starting to get ridiculously cheap and like a little bit more advanced. All you do is take this, it's basically a pump, well, not even a pump, it just like circulates water, I guess that's a pump, and applies a very specific temperature. You put it inside a pot not included, or any heat-proof vessel, and you can cook the things for really long periods of time. I have like a big plastic container that I can cook like a whole ribeye, a whole leg of lamb, a whole leg of pork, shoulder of pork, whatever, and it comes out perfect every time if you just follow the steps and instructions. Even something as simple as like soft boiling or hard boiling an egg, they come out so good. Would highly, highly recommend either of these two. If you're not into like enormous pieces of meat, this you'll probably get more mileage out of. If you want to play around more with the idea of sous vide and don't want to be limited by the size of the cooking vessel, I would argue that this is the better, cheaper purchase, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. Honorable mention here, when you're talking about sous vide, sorry, let's come back on camera. When you're talking about sous vide, a lot of the time you're going to want to cook in vacuum sealed bags. So one of these vacuum sealers would be quite useful. Having said that, you can get away with Ziploc bags or like different types of heat-proof cooking bags, some of which are reusable. So see what you want to spend the money on. This would be obviously least priority because you can get away without it, but you can find relatively cheap vacuum sealers. Last category coming up. Don't know why I looked off camera, there's nothing there. This last shot was not worth moving all of this garbage. Okay, so our last category is going to be entirely up to you. So these are what I would consider as more niche, less essential purchases, but obviously based on the type of food that you like to make, these will make more sense for you. So for example, if you hate ice cream, an ice cream machine is probably not the best purchase for you because this was expensive. Dehydrator, probably not for you unless you have a bunch of, I don't know, veg scraps and fruit things and dehydration projects that you want to take care of. This will be useful. A panini press, you can do this in a pan, although very useful for pancakes, it folds up both ways. A pasta machine, you don't need one if you don't like making pasta. This like milk frother velvetizer, if you don't like frothy beverages like cappuccinos or really frothy hot chocolate, not for you. That was a voice. Rice cooker, probably the one I use most out of all of these. Highly recommended if you do eat a lot of rice, but again, this is entirely up to you. There's some stupid grill that I got from a sponsorship thing that I would not recommend to anyone. And this, you're probably gonna come at me, but I don't think a toaster is super useful unless you make a lot of toast. Obviously, it's kind of considered a basic in like a kitchen setup, but you can very easily make toast in a pan or in the oven. So if we're talking about trying to cook as much as possible for the least budget possible, this is the stage where you kind of go into what your interests are. So whether you want a meat mincer, a meat slicer, any of the things you saw over here, none of them. A juicer is probably another useful one that maybe some like health fanatics or people who are really interested in juicing things, I don't know. This is the section where you kind of fill in the gaps with things that you are interested in, but I would say that this is the least important category out of all of them. Honorable mention too, I'm currently staring at my kettle and coffee machine. Yes, of course, I get a lot of mileage out of them, but you can make boiling water in a pot and coffee using that same hot water, so don't care. Thank you very, very much for watching. If you have made it this far, I really appreciate it. If you do want to check out any of the products that I linked here, maybe not specifically these ones, but a lot of the other stuff, I will be leaving affiliate links in the link. No, not link in my bio, wrong platform. In the description of this video. What other calls to actions do I want? If you think that this was a terrible list, or if you think that there are some more useful pieces of equipment or like kitchen basics that I have not mentioned that you can't live without, please let me know in the comment section. I'm actually really interested to see how you guys cook and what helps you guys cook. And yeah, happy cooking. No, that's just... And yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. No, like, comment, subscribe, yeah, all those things.